the sun gets weaker, we get more cosmic rays, we get more cloud cover, the planet cools. It's a known pattern.
Adapt 2030 Mini Ice Age Conversations covers changes in our climate due to a new and intensifying grand solar minimum. In the media, overlooking, downplaying, or burying cold weather changes occurring on our planet. This is in order to keep the global warming agenda steaming full speed ahead. I do this podcast and radio program because we need to begin conversations on how to adapt our food growing strategies long before 2030 as agricultural zones shift, affecting global crop output, but very few mainstream media outlets are talking about the most important issue of our time: cold weather crop losses. Our sun is going through a 400-year cycle, which has effects on our weather patterns as our magnetosphere weakens and the jet streams go out of flow. It's not CO2, it's not you, it's the sun. Are you ready to thrive in the grand solar minimum? Then join me for Mini Ice Age Conversations. I'm your host, David Dubine. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are on this planet. Today, I have with me inventor Lee Wheelbarger. We wanted to talk about how the atmosphere is really starting to show signs of behaving, shall we say, strangely. What was considered the normal when you were growing up, I don't know how old each of you are, but if you're over 40, if you're over 50, or if you're over 60, you remember what normal was, what a normal hailstorm was like, what a normal rainstorm was like, what a normal thunderstorm or weather front coming through. Today, that is completely not the case. The new normal is the extreme. And it is not really CO2. It is the effects that we're expecting as our magnetosphere on the planet weakens, more cosmic rays bombard our planet, the jet streams go out of flow because of a weakening magnetosphere. The cloud patterns are shifting. If you haven't seen, everywhere you look, I just did a video on this yesterday. It's record rain, record rain. There's very little what we consider light, steady rains that water crops. It is flood or it is drought these days. The same with the hailstorms. It is either inundating hail that comes up to your knees or waist, which I never experienced as a kid, or there's nothing. It's a drought. As you can see, things have just changed. What happened in Paris? Why is there a half a foot of hail in Paris? Why did their subways flood that are rendering part of the city unusable in the tube stations? We saw that in New York City as well earlier in the year. There's so many anomalies going on. I wanted to try to bring it together. Lee has a few explanations of what's happening. Wanted to talk about that cyclone that rolled over Yemen and Oman. They call it extremely rare tropical cyclone over the Middle East. Those two just don't go together. The record rains across the Sahel right now. This is forecasted. Why do you think the Chinese are in there with all their investment money, building railways into, it looks like the shorelines of the mega lakes. If you go back 7,000 years, you can start to find these large lakes in the Sahel Desert area of North Africa. And the Chinese put the terminus of their rail lines right there at what were the lakes. Now, all these massive floods we've seen in Africa are starting to drain where? Oh, yeah, back into those same mega lake areas again. Now, of course, they're not going to fill the capacity of this one single season of rain, but you can already see the progression from last year when it was record rains in those areas that it drained off rather quickly, evaporated, or people caught the water. This year, it's record rain again, and there's much more rain. Now, this time it's actually starting to settle out into the drainage basins. Now, you can just imagine these next 4 or 5 years moving forward, we're going to see some of the same things, and this rainfall is going to continue, and what was barren, let's say, desert area could suddenly become grasslands and grow zones, especially with modern agriculture. And if the Chinese were to put bore wells down there and actually get to that primary water source across the desert, well, you can see that it could become a new crop growing zone. And this episode's brought to you by TrueLeafMarket.com. Heirloom and organic seeds since 1974. Full range of garden seeds, microgreen seeds, sprouting seeds, wheatgrass, grain seeds, flower seeds, herb seeds, and ground cover crop. I encourage you to take a look at their website, trueleafmarket.com, and they even have free starter guides there for you to learn how to grow sprouts, microgreens, herbs, and wheatgrass. Use the link below and give yourself the gift of organic and heirloom seeds. So Lee, I know you had a few ideas. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thanks for having me. Yeah, there are a lot of things happening in the world. The Russians are preparing, the weather patterns are changing, the hailstorms, the hail-sized stones are much larger than they used to be. We're seeing the new arrowhead or arrow-type hail, where there's clumps of hail gathering together and falling as unusual shapes or things that kind of look like oversized deformed snowflakes. So there's a variety of things happening around the world. We've got areas that are being inundated by rain, like you were saying. Here in Florida, on the ranch, we've had 15 inches of rain for the year, but we've got 8 inches of that rain in the last week. So, it's almost like hurricane season, even before hurricane season starts. And, speaking of that, we've already got a tropical depression that looks like it wants to get fired up out here in the Gulf of Mexico now. So, yeah, the weather is changing. The Earth's temperature has dropped by about a half a degree Celsius just since Trump has been elected. That's been big news. Glacial sheets, you were talking about the winds were changing. There's all kinds of stuff going on all over the world. But the thing of it is we expect all this, because when you look back in history is where all of our research comes from. We just study the historical record, and you see the 200-year cycles, the 400-year cycles, and the 200-year cycles are part of the 400-year cycle. It's just that the 200-year cycle is weaker. So you have a strong 400-year cycle, then you have the weaker 200-year cycle in between, then a stronger 400-year cycle. It's just half of the sun is going out of phase during the 200-year cycle, but all 4 electromagnetic fields of the sun are going out of phase during the 400-year cycle. That's why the 400-year cycle is worse than the 200-year cycle. And the problem that we have is the last cycle we had was a 200-year cycle, meaning this is going to be a 400-year cycle, and we will go much, much colder. And, I always refer back to, during the last cycle, Washington rode a horse across New York Harbor with a small contingent of men pulling cannons because New York Harbor was frozen solid. And that is the 200-year cycle. So during the 400-year cycle, you can expect ice over major waterways much further south than that. So what all would you like to cover here this evening?
Well, I did want to go right into those atmospheric changes, talking about how the magnetosphere is weakening further. The galactic cosmic rays and the cosmic rays coming from our sun, these two sources as well. We have all these volcanic eruptions. Merapi just going off again for the 6th eruption in the last few days, sending ash another 30,000 feet up into the atmosphere. I don't know how many more of these volcanoes are going to need to go off to have the combined effect of some driver inside the cloud patterns on our planet, or how much sulfur dioxide will be up there. I've been doing an enormous amount of research on the past, especially the late antique little ice age. This is an era, say 535 AD, but during the 535 to say 543 time period, there were 3 major eruptions on the planet. Now, this had something to do to change the actual physical air composition enough where there was sulfur dioxide in the air we breathe, or at that time the people were breathing, to actually make them sick. And you find that, especially going back to the Byzantine Empire, and you go through Turkey and take a look at the Justinian plague, and all these things were brought on pretty much by what is now considered excessive amounts of SO2 or sulfur dioxide up in the atmosphere. Even through ice cores, they're really finding that there was a huge deposit layer of that with the ash in the ice cores. So driving forward, just trying to get a pin and a gauge on, the amplification we've seen. You're talking about not only strange arrow-sized hail, but the size of the hail is increasing. Every time you look now, it's a new record hailstone on the planet. And this started approximately 1.5 years ago down in Argentina, and then it was in Texas and in Arkansas, and you just start to find all these really large hailstones suddenly pounding the planet. So moving forward, what really to expect? The amplification's already here. We've seen this ramp up specifically in the last couple months. You noticed with the weather fronts slamming together, they seem to be more ferocious with the cold, with the heating, the cool front and the warmer airs mixing and driving, faster winds to make larger hailstones. So just kind of a general mix and a timeline moving out. What can be expected with changes in the atmosphere, which we're starting to see everywhere. You can't really not be awake right now or even following any just general news. Even if you open your front page local newspaper, there's some kind of strange weather event, and it's sure not global warming. It's happening way faster than the IPC models would have even forecast. They were saying this would occur in like 2100 or 2150. They had to keep pushing their timelines out because the CO2 wasn't rising and the weather effects weren't amplifying as fast as they thought. So it's sure not CO2. It's happening too quickly. It's almost like an instant flip on the switch, which matches up with the sun changes. So Lee, I'll leave it back to you.
Well, the first thing we're going to see is because we've got more cosmic rays and more galactic cosmic rays coming in, because when you have a weaker sun, more galactic cosmic rays make their way to the planet, whereas that when the sun is stronger with more sunspots and flares and so on and so forth, that kind of like pushes that out and channels the ones that are coming towards us. So we don't get as many of those on the planet as far as, actually even in the solar system, because we're protected within the sun's heliosphere. But as the sun becomes weaker and we go further into the minimum and the Earth's magnetosphere weakens, these galactic cosmic rays come in, and they're kind of like a sparkler. And so as they come in through the atmosphere, these galactic cosmic rays are charged anywhere from 300 million to 500 million tera electron volts, which is a lot of power. And so as that particle comes in at almost the speed of light and it makes contact with other particles in our atmosphere, it sheds its energy and changes biology, does all kinds of things as far as cellular structure, as well as what it does to individual particles. And they shower off like sparklers coming down through the atmosphere. So if you can imagine each one of these galactic cosmic rays coming in is just like a sparkler, and as it comes into the atmosphere and starts making contact, you just light the end of it, and as it continues on its way towards the surface of the planet, it just keeps showering off all these sparks in different directions. The problem is those sparks are seeds for clouds, because they create what is referred to as a particulate or aerosol in the atmosphere, and moisture can condense on those particles, and that's what creates the clouds. And when you talk about the hail going up, when you have, let's say you have this exact same amount of moisture in a cloud, so let's say you've got 1,000 tons of moisture up there and it's over this cloud that's, say, a mile by a mile. If you add additional cosmic rays and galactic cosmic rays and that additional nucleation, it will share the moisture in that cloud with that additional nucleation. And as it shares that moisture, it takes these larger droplets that were already there and makes them smaller. And at the same time it makes them smaller, it makes them more refractive. So more light from the sun is reflected back out into space, because darker clouds absorb more energy than lighter color clouds. Imagine like a London fog. You have much more of a denser fog. It's the same amount of water, it's just in a whole lot more drops. So when the hailstones are coming up through, whereas that if it was making impact with larger droplets, part of that would shed off. But as the hailstone is traveling up through and the particles are smaller, the individual water droplets, as they come into the contact with the hailstone, it allows them to freeze onto the surface more readily because they're smaller, and that allows the hailstones to grow even larger in size. And so as you're getting clumplets of this, which is snow and hail together, and then that is freezing in this mist, that's what's giving you all these weird shaped hailstones, is how that's forming in our atmosphere before it falls back to the ground. So we're going to be seeing all kinds of other weird things like that, even bigger hailstones. The other thing that I see already happening, and you can go and look at this around the world, and that is the increase in lightning, the increase in positive lightning, the increase in sprites and gnomes and things of that nature, which are basically plasma discharges between the Earth and space. And so more of that is taking place. The lightning bolts are becoming much, much, much more intense and are being more devastating to infrastructure when they impact things like power lines or two-way communications towers or what have you. And then the problem is with the structures that are in excess of 300 feet above average ground level, AGL. So if you have a structure that is anywhere from 150 feet up to about 300 feet, that structure can be hit by either a positive or a negative lightning strike. And normally if it's below 150 feet, it's normally only hit by mostly negative lightning strikes. But when you exceed 300 feet in altitude into a structure sticking up, that normally gets hit by positive lightning strikes. And so as we get more and more of these positive lightning strikes, these taller buildings that are in excess of 300 feet tall are at a much higher risk of damage to those structures and the equipment in and on those buildings. So we're going to be seeing, problems with the lightning there when it hits electrical grids, taking out transformers, taking out generations facilities, striking refineries that have tall structures within those and other facilities like that. Then we're also going to see, because we're going to have more cold weather pushing further south, the infrastructure is not designed for those freezing temperatures. So in that, you're going to start seeing more water lines are frozen up in the wintertime. You're going to see problems with sewage treatment facilities are freezing up. You're going to have problems with vehicles that didn't normally have to be plugged in are now having to be plugged in, and at much further latitudes towards the equator than they were, or closer to the equator than they were before. You're going to have, infrastructure failures. You're going to have bridges with joint problems and so on and so forth. You're going to have highways that aren't normally used to the thawing and freezing and thawing and freezing. And so you're going to have degradation to that infrastructure. Then you're going to have the weather issues like you're talking about, of where we're going to continue to see a decrease in average precipitation. But the problem is, when the precipitation does come, it will be deluges like we've been seeing here lately, and much, much more intense as more atmospheric compression events continue to take place and become even larger. Because as the sun continues to decrease in its intensity, and the coronal holes continue to grow out of the sun, or grow on the sun, we continue to get more cosmic rays coming out of the sun, which are spewing out of those coronal holes. And those cosmic rays, as they come in onto the planet, some are, and most, I can't say all, but a lot are captured by the Earth's magnetosphere, and that is creating our aurora borealis. And so when those waves of energy coming in, and so if, say, like you have a small CME, the particles coming in are, if you were to count them all up, would be the equivalent of like 1,000 aircraft carriers. And if you took that same mass of those 1,000 aircraft carriers and you converted that into a giant battery bank and charged it up to 3 to 7 tera electron volts and brought that into the Earth all at one time, that's the energy that's coming in. So, that's what would be dealing with the electromagnetic field lines of the planet, which cause things like Carrington events. And then all of that energy has to dissipate into the planet in some way, shape, or form. So you get that in the forms of lightning, and then you also get that in the form of energy going through the core and heating the magma and making it a little bit warmer. And then because the outside of the Earth is starting to cool a little bit, well, anything that cools a little bit contracts a little bit. So now you've got magma that is a little hotter, it expands a little bit, and the crust of the planet wants to cool a little bit. So you're going to have a little bit more earthquake activity. In addition to that, you're going to have an increase in volcanic activity, and the major events of both earthquake activity and volcanic activity always tend to coincide with as going into a grand solar minimum or coming out of a grand solar minimum. We have that activity all the time, but the big events and a little bit more prevalent down around where you're coming in and going out of a grand solar minimum. So as we progress into this, we're going to be seeing more of this, like Pu'u'o and other volcanoes that are going off, and hot lava coming up out of there, and you can see that by the way it's geysering and the color of it. The brighter it is, the hotter it is, and then we've got the additional gases coming up through the cracks that are flammable from methane from the materials burning off. So, there's a lot of stuff that's going to continue to happen and get worse. This is just the beginning of it.
And since I have been talking about our need moving forward in this new society that we're entering as our global grain production starts to be reduced in yield, your food prices are going to skyrocket. And I mean skyrocket, not just doubling or tripling, something like 5 or 10 times higher by 2020 at the very least. TrueLeafMarket.com. I really want to talk about growing your own food, which will be a necessity moving forward. They've been around since 1974, heirloom and organic seeds. Since I've started talking about them in my videos, I have a lot of people write and say that they've previously ordered, that they know the owner, having great results, good customer service. They quite enjoyed the seed quality as well. And there's so many ways that we can go about growing different types of vegetables that we're going to need. Microgreens are incredibly nutritious. They're super fast to grow. In less than a week, you can have something that you can eat. And we know the benefits of microgreens. All you have to do is use a search engine and look up vitamin, mineral, nutrient content of microgreens. You'll be shocked. Also, sprouts. We can get those a little bit taller, a little more dense, a little bit larger volume on the vegetation mass coming off of there. So how do you know what kind of sprouts to grow? How about wheatgrass or herbs? What about different types of herbs that we can add to our foods? Now, what I just described to you, there's a full range of starter guides there at TrueLeafMarket.com for you to take a look at. Even if it's just for your own knowledge and you don't purchase something from them, at least get the information so you know how to grow microgreens, you know how to grow sprouts, you understand what some of the herbs are for. And not only that, they have wheatgrass and grain seeds. So when I'm talking about grain growing regions going offline, we just need to look back in history and see where across the planet there was difficulty growing grains when this grand solar minimum intensified and the jet stream started wandering just like they're doing today, due to a decreased magnetosphere that does not hold our jet streams locked in their traditional flows. Grains are one thing, herb seeds are another, cover crops, something different, but whatever you do, organic seeds are going to be a necessity because you can save those seeds and then grow them the next season, which you unequivocally cannot do with GMO. TrueLeafMarket.com. Use the link below and give yourself the gift of organic and heirloom seeds.
And everything that I'm talking about coming is all part of a historic pattern that goes back hundreds of thousands and millions of years that has all been done through ice cores and 17 other data sets to correlate all this together, in the words of Dr. Kirkby from CERN, exquisitely, to show that as the sun gets weaker, we get more cosmic rays, we get more cloud cover, the planet cools. It's a known pattern. So, it's all coming. It's all going to get worse. We're going to have more, growing areas across the United States going offline, as well as in Europe. So as the jet stream continues to progress more southerly in the northern hemisphere, or just say the jet stream's progressing closer to the equator, as they start migrating towards the equator, the regions that are closer to the polar regions will become cooler. So the, across the middle part of the United States is going to become cooler as the jet stream continues to move south. Same thing's going to apply in, South America and so on and so forth. As the jet south of the equator starts moving north, more of the regions in the southern area of the planet will start getting colder weather because that cold air mass will start progressing closer and closer to the equator. So we'll continue to see that. And then we're going to start seeing the jet moving and even further south across the Atlantic. Europe's going to become much colder. Britain's going to have a real hard time. So there's going to be a lot of this going on, and it's going to be in the news. It'll be more going on than Dave, myself, and several others would be able to cover. There aren't enough news channels covering it to cover everything that's already happening. So I'll leave it at that, Dave. Where else you want to go?
Yeah, I'd like to add in Asia on top of that. Every grand solar minimum, you're talking about these jet streams shifting. And I just did a video talking about the real reason that North Korea is at the bargaining table about their nuclear program, because they're in a drought already. And as we intensify through this grand solar minimum, this is just the first year and a half or even 2 years out of this full cycle that'll run at least until 2030 or 2035. And there's conjecture, will it go to 2050? With that being said, with the drought already in place in North Korea and Heilongjiang, where they grow wheat, up in China, showing excessive drought signs up there as well that are not abating at all. North Korea is not going to be able to grow any food. They're already they put all the soldiers out and gave them leave to go search for food. And then, with the government mandate to go find any food you can and take it for the army. So the farmers aren't even really in the fields, because the farmers were, I would say, conscripted to go with the other patrols to go look, because they know all the farmers, they know where the food's at. So they were trying to get everybody to, tell on each other, like, hey, they're hiding some corn over here. Hey, they're doing. So North Korea is not really going to have any agriculture this year. So that's one of the reasons they're at it. But back to Asia, these same shifts of the jet stream. I'm actually working on a video, the reason that China with the soy war. Now, just in Zero Hedge, it came out and said China will buy every single amount of soy and corn that the U.S. can produce from this point forward, that the trade war is over. And it was, why was it such a thing so quickly? The only reason I can say that they brought it to the news front about the trade war with China, with the soybeans and with the sorghum, was to try to plant that. So later on, when you see food prices rising, you'll say, oh, yeah, there was a trade war with China. But you got to realize the amount of coverage about the trade war ending is so minuscule in comparison to what it was when it started. And it's like that old adage. I heard this when I was traveling down in South Africa. It's about gossip in a village. So there was an older woman in the village that had gossiped something about another villager, but it wasn't true. So the whole lesson was, the shaman of the village said, now take a chicken, and I want you to rip all the feathers off the chicken and throw them into the air. Another day later, he said, all right, now I want you to go pick up all the feathers and put them back on the chicken and see if you have the same amount of feathers. And of course, she could not even close. It was like about half the feathers that she recollected. And he's like, yes, that's what happens. The rumor you started, 50% of those people are not going to know that it wasn't true, because you've already set the seeds for it. Literally. So what the media is doing right now is they're setting up the conditions for you to expect price rises. Oh, there's a trade war over here. Oh, there's a saber rattling thing over here. Oh, there's a currency devaluation over there. Now, whether it continues in that same fashion or whether it instantly stops, just as this trade war with China stopped, how many people's minds are still on that there's a trade war out there, that food prices are going up, the farmers are getting hurt, everybody's trying to get, this drought is going to continue across Asia. Although one thing, Indonesia is going to get much wetter. I've been doing a lot of research here on what happens specifically in Asia. And this, as the jet streams shift and as this intertropical convergence zone, which brings the moisture patterns during the monsoon, once this shifts also, they have very good records of where it shifted, specifically in South America as well, and Asia. They know exactly where it's going to become drier and where it's going to become wetter, at least on the 400-year cycle. And it looks like Indonesia is going to get incredibly wet, along with Myanmar. Now, that's just interesting, because Myanmar only uses half of its food growing area. Half the land lies fallow, and if they needed to bring up production, they could. Because another unknown fact is, Myanmar produced more rice in the 1960s than China did. It was the breadbasket of Asia. And currently, they're only farming half